Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marjorie Maltais, and welcome to NYO Canada online workshops. Our YouTube live chat is open, and we will be fielding questions throughout the workshop, so please feel free to post any comments, questions, or let us know where you're tuning in from. We're excited today to welcome back for a second workshop NYO alumni Paul Hyman from Brain Fitness International. Good afternoon, Paul.
Hi there, everyone. Trust you had a great week. Okay, so we're going to start taking off again with music, arts, and the brain and mind. So we'll go to the next slide, and you can still see how much is coming out every week. It's unbelievable the amount of research that's going on about the brain. It's like the final frontier. Okay, our next slide, please. So my goal in these 4 webinars is to give you an example of how we as musicians actually grow the brain and the different parts that are very much affected by the brain. So next slide, please. So I want to get into preferred learning performance style. I also want to do optimal brain organization. We all have our own, what we call dominance, eye, ears, and all of that. And that has a big impact on how we prepare for an audition or for a performance. And then I'm going to finish up with 2 really, really good stress release techniques. Okay, so again, we are in never before land, this COVID-19, and yet there's a lot of things that I think is coming as a benefit of all of this. Okay, and next slide. So how our brain really learns is really unique to ourselves. We're going to talk next week about how we develop different wiring systems in our brain, neuroplasticity. It's one of the hottest topics in the last 10 years about the brain. So we all come with our own unique wiring system. Okay, next. So one of the things to be looking at in terms of preparing for a performance, audition, being in a performance, or what you're going through right now, is our brain can actually put up a barrier that blocks you. You're going to get a lot of negativity, or you can see it as an opportunity and build bridges. Like, what can I do in this circumstance to move forward? Again, resiliency really comes out of our learned experience of life. It is sort of hardwired. However, it's really built upon life's experience, and we get better and better as we go through these challenges. And next, please. So again, when we're faced with adversity, how many of you can say that you've actually bounced back feeling stronger with more resources than ever before? I think one of the things I like to look at is even this week I had an opportunity to join with Carolyn Christie and Lorna McGee, 2 flute players, and I was really touched by their knowledge that they shared during the webinar. For me, I'm a lifelong learner, but I do have to say I probably would never have had a chance to meet both of them if it hadn't been for this COVID-19 and NYO. So again, you must have a dream before you can make it come true. Next, please. So we're going into the complexity of life, where, as I said, we have all this wiring, we're getting all these different experiences. All of this is getting wired into our cells. Sometimes it can feel like a jumble of strings and really, really tightly knitted together. Next, please. And then we get to this next slide, and you can see ready to snap. We've really gone through our resources. We feel like we're at our end, and it's just a little thread holding us together. Okay, next, please. So when we talk about self-awareness, I really want you to take with you from these webinars, how do you know when you're ready to perform? It seems like a simple question. However, when do you really know that you're really, really ready for it? And this takes into consideration, point 2, your own values, beliefs, biases, and experiences. And again, to be able to manage self-talk. What's the kind of self-talk that really encourages you? Like, yes, I can do it. I'm excited. This is one of a kind. Or other kinds of self-talk that can be a little bit more self-critical. Next point is, the more you know, when you know more about yourself, the more you can do. Okay, so we want to look at, when we're going into some of those negativity patterns, is to disrupt that problem and come back with solutions. Okay, next, please. So you might have seen this before. We have all these different emotional states. It's quite interesting. A good friend of mine that works for the Canadian Mental Health Association as a manager actually has all these pictures on buttons. And when he does a team meeting, his people come in, they'll pick one of these faces, put them on, and that's their sort of check-in on how they're feeling. Next, please. So some of you, depending on the level of the performance, may experience a little bit of anxiety. Last week, I took you through 4 breathing exercises. In our later webinars, sometimes people that are going through anxiety may not want to use breathing techniques because they might already be hyperventilating and breathing too much, too quickly. So we're going to talk about other physical grounding techniques to slow us down, to get us back in the body. Next, please. So what I want you to see in this screen is right in the middle there, you see hardwired. Hardwired is what we're born with. And then on the other side, we are, through life's experience, we learn these other certain emotional states, okay? And sometimes we're using less of these emotional states because of circumstances and experience. Next, please. So your current stress level, like I said, how do you know what you know when you're ready to play? Okay, so I've got this little character here, got it in my window here, and all of a sudden you might start here. Or you might go from here to here. Now, another way of looking at this is, I think this is a great analogy. Everybody see this cup? Over here, we come into the life empty. Over here is another cup of life. And as I fill it up with water, are you aware of this much life in your cup? Maybe, maybe not. If not, life is going to come again at you. Now we have a little bit more. Are you aware of this? If not, it's going to keep coming at you. And I think you all know what's going to happen eventually. Sooner or later, it's going to be this one little drop that's going to cause the overflow. How many of you can say that you've had experiences where things have built up, built up, built up, and then finally it seems to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, such as working with technology. So a lot of things that you're going to be doing with these techniques is there's a little in, a little out, and you're going back and forth, wanting to make sure that your glass has an awareness down here, because you may have one of these days. And you didn't overflow, okay? Next slide, please. So there's a couple pictures here. The first one is all those red spots are a PET scan monitoring the brain, and it's about looking at the red spots. Those are the hot spots, okay? So on the left-hand side is the left hemisphere, right is the right hemisphere. We have at the top our frontal lobes, and at the back our brainstem, back of the brain. The next slide, everybody, is what we're seeing more and more doing scans of people that are depressed. You do not see very little activity on the left side of the brain. What's lit up is the right side, the red part, and that's where our emotions, our overwhelm, some of the functions of the right hemisphere is the big picture. So what we want to do is bring back integration. So what I'd like you all to do right now is stand up, please. Very quickly, just stand up. And as you're standing there, and we're talking about the mind-body connection, I want you to experience, think about this as the worst afternoon webinar you've ever attended. Just, I'll put that out to you, okay? And as you think about this worst afternoon, or maybe morning on the West Coast, how many of you notice you have a tendency to want to put your eyes down towards the ground? How many of you notice when you're thinking of that worst moment, your weight has shifted over to one side of your body or to the other? And if you notice the weight shift, so the brain is unbalanced, the physical body is a result of that mind-body connection. It's out of balance. Now, we're going to shift states. I want you to stand as if you're on top of the world right now. You're really, really feeling wonderful. We'll make it even better. I want you to imagine maybe winning a Lotto Max. It's gone up to 70 million. You're $70 million richer. That's how good I want you to feel. And you're going to take that money and you're going to donate some of it to NYO, right? To make it feel great. Now, here's how we're going to trick the brain. Instead of the eyes going down, that you probably didn't think about, I want you to gently look up to the horizon with your eyes, put a smile on your face, and say, am I ever having a terrible afternoon? And smile. Do you believe those words? It's a little bit more difficult when you put that eyes up, smile on your face. And that's a big difference when you're thinking about a performance or walking out. What is the kind of presence that you're showing to your colleagues and to your audience? Are you really taking up that fullness of yourself, ready to perform with a smile, eyes up, and being totally yourself? Next slide, please, is Charlie Brown. I think you'll like this. This is my depressed stance. When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is straighten up and hold your head high, because then you start to feel better. If you want to get any joy out of being depressed, you got to stand like this. Okay, next. Okay, so we're going to look at right brain, left brain. Here, we've got an analysis. So far, this brain scan machine says you're not right brain or left brain. Maybe no brain. Okay, next slide, please. So what we're looking at here, everybody, is the green side is the right hemisphere. You can see how open it is. It's the big picture. I say it's the forest, the total big picture. Okay, people out there playing. On the left side, you see these little cubicles that people are in. Now, across this little space between the left and the right, you have these bridges. Now, that space right across the middle is called the corpus callosum. And it's a switchboard between communication with the right side and the left side. Okay? So the information is transferred only one way. So you can see one group of people from the right side stepping over to the left. It does not go back and forth. You see another bridge further up to the top where people are moving from the left side to the right. Again, it does not go back and forth. So there is this wiring connection. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about this, but that corpus callosum is unique to both women and men. And like I said, I'm not going to get into it so much, but women have a larger corpus callosum than men do. They have better access to communication. They can talk emotionally. They can talk about the big picture. And they can also talk about the details. And they can go back and forth, a lot easier than men. For men, we have less of that wiring. So some of you may find if you're talking to a male or a male's talking to themselves, to each other, they may just go, uh-huh. Now, you might have expressed yourself for maybe 15 minutes. You expect some feedback, and they get it all. They just don't have the wiring, so they'll just go, yeah, okay. Okay, next, please. I want you to say the color, not the word, okay? So start at the very top, very quickly, the color, not the word. Okay. Just notice maybe the challenge that you had. Next slide, please. So if you found that to be a challenge, it was meant to be, okay? The right side and the left side have different processes. On the left side, you have the text, the language of those words, green, red, blue. However, the right side is processing the color, the big picture. Left side is the language. Next slide, please. Now, in your handouts on page 6, there's two sides of the brain, the left side and the right side. Okay, so you may be wondering, are you left or are you right? Now, when we do the integration exercises later on in this webinar and the next two, I'll be teaching you some other exercises. Now, you can go down that list and make a selection between, am I more of the right side or am I more of the left side? Now, at the bottom of your page 6, there's a very interesting awareness piece about when under stress. So you see when under stress under the right side, when under stress under the left side. Now, I have drawn X's, arrows, and this is important. There's two kinds of stress. Acute stress, which may be a phone call that comes in the middle of the night, and they say, Paul, you're not going to believe what just happened. You better be sitting down. My life will never be the same again. And then they tell me the information. So that is called acute stress. So on page 6, everybody, when that arrow goes across from the right side across to the left side, if you want to, you can write in acute. That's your very first response to that immediate stressor. That arrow that goes from the left side across to the right side, that's acute stress for left brain dominant people. The second level of stress is called chronic stress. It's the same, it's the same, it's the same. And after a while, that pattern, you go back from across the right, you go back over to the left, you go from the left back over to the right. That's chronic stress that persists, okay? So you're constantly looking at, are you in acute stress or chronic stress. Now, here's something that you're going to find interesting. If we go back, yes, how do you find what hemisphere you are? You can go down that list and look at the words. But what I want you to do right now, everybody, is join your hands together. So put your hands together. Notice what thumb is on top. The thumb that's on top is your dominant hemisphere. Now, how this works neurologically is the fact that our thumb is controlled by our same hemisphere. Our fingers are controlled by the opposite hemisphere. Some people think that our very first tool that we had to manipulate, manage our environment was the pincer grip. Two opposing movements of thumb and fingers so we can manipulate tools to work our environment. Okay? So if I was with you in person, I do something called muscle monitoring. I would do like a muscle check, and I could tell you that when you put your thumb together, it's wonderful to realize if you're more right brain or if you switch, if you're left brain. And this has a lot to do with how you prepare for an audition, because if you're right brain, you're going to be looking at the overall big picture, the emotions that you want to elicit, the intuition. The left people are going to be looking at the very, very precise details. And what we want to do as musicians is work together. We want to weave it all together so we have this total brain integration. Now, next slide, please. So this is the left hemisphere, people, okay? And we have 32 different profiles. So you can see a variation of different hands, different eyes, different ears, different brain hemispheres, left hemisphere, okay? And I want you to pay attention to profile C, okay? It's sort of down the second line over to the right. Now, the next slide, please. This is the right hemisphere. And again, you see 16 different combinations of eye, ear, hand, and foot, and brain, okay? And that has a very interesting outcome when it comes to how we behave. So turn to the next slide, please. So again, you can turn the click on that. That's one way of looking at it. So that's a person looking at you. The next picture is you looking out from yourself out into the world. So when you joined your hands together, everyone, whatever thumb was on top, I want you to color in that picture on the left-hand side as one perspective of somebody looking at you, right, left, or on the other picture, right in, fill in, right, left. Okay, so you get a sense of what you're doing. So that's your dominant brain hemisphere. The next slide, please. We have brain and the vision, okay? How we see things. And what's interesting is that you can see the crossover. So that right eye is your detail eye because there's a lot more neural connections over to the left hemisphere, your logic brain, looking at details. And then your left eye crosses over more neural connections to the right side. Now, they both have connections to both hemispheres, but they do have more specific wiring across left and right hemispheres. Now, to find out what your dominant eye is, I'd like you all to take up your hands like this. Bring your hands together. So between your thumb you create a little tiny window. Everybody got a little tiny window? Take a moment, look at something at a distance, raise up your hands, looking at that object through that little tiny window, and I'd like you to close your right eye. How many people can still see that object with your left eye? Notice, that's your left eye dominant. Open both your eyes again, look at that object. Now I'd like you to close your left eye. How many of you noticed the object jumped out of your window? Therefore, your right eye dominant, okay, is crossing over, okay? So just this little tiny window, close your right eye. If you still see that picture, your left eye dominant. If you're looking at that picture and you close your left eye, you are right eye dominant. So you might want to take your pen and fill that in on page 8. And now what I'd like you to do is, again, next slide, please. We have different ways of looking at perspectives, okay? So some of us may see the next image. Is that outside in or inside out? Just look at that. How does that appear to you? Now look at the next picture. Is that outside in or inside out? So there's different ways that each of us are wired to have a visual perspective, okay? So that's important on how we approach preparing, practicing, how we are preparing for a performance. It's really what is our visual focus, and what we want to do is to bring that together, okay? The next picture, please. So look at this picture, everybody. Are the circles moving on you? Just keep staring. Do you notice they seem to be moving in a circular fashion? So one of the ways that we can integrate our vision, okay, is the next slide, please. It's eye tracking. Now, you want to do your very best to keep your head nice and still. And you're going to start off with your left hand, looking at your thumb. Left arm is connected to the right hemisphere, the big picture. So you're going to go up and over to the left, down and around. Bring your thumb up the midline, up and over to the right, down and around. And just keep looking at your thumb, blinking your eyes and breathing. And it's really important to blink and breathe, because one of the things that happens when we go into a stress response, we call it ocular lock. Our eyes are just staring and our eyes are not blinking. Okay, so you're doing that, watching it, your thumb, keeping your head nice and still. Now your right hand, everybody. Again, this is connected to the left hemisphere, looking at your thumb. You're up and over, doing these, for my window, a little small, but you're doing this infinity sign, or the number 8 lying on its side. Okay, so you're getting that movement going. So this is the integration of the eyes. Now take both your hands, join your hands together, cross your thumbs. Again, keeping your head nice and still. Look at your thumbs, and now do that same infinity sign, looking at your thumbs, keeping your head nice and still, tracing with these infinity signs. It seems really easy. It is, but it has a profound effect. Next slide, please. And the next picture is I was teaching school teachers. It was all special education. And after the training, these special education teachers were taking these techniques out. One teacher was working with one of the children who, as you can kind of see, did not like drawing. She took this child to the blackboard, gave them a piece of chalk, and have them do that infinity sign with the chalk in one hand, turned it over, chalk with the other hand, took both hands with a piece of chalk, and did it around the blackboard again. Next picture, everyone. Notice the difference. That's because I talked to the teacher afterwards who gave me this picture. That's about 5 minutes of doing those eye exercises and having that child go back and draw another picture. And you can kind of see that it's a lot more color. You've got smiles on the people's faces. It's really wonderful. Next slide, please. Okay, everybody, here's your chance to read some English gibberish. Even though it looks strange, I'm confident you can all read it. So start. How many of you successfully were able to read what that said? So then again, maybe one of the other benefits is you don't need spell check anymore. Okay, it's just another idea. Okay, next slide, please, is on listening. Really important as musicians, okay? And I like how the Chinese interpretation of listening, you can see how many parts are actually connected to listening. It's not just our ears or external sounds, it's internal sounds also. You are involved, your eyes are involved, you have complete undivided attention, and you're listening with your heart, with your emotions. Next slide. Here we have brain and hearing. So again, what you have is a way of seeing how the right ear connects with the left hemisphere, the left ear connects with the right hemisphere, okay? Now, just to see how this works, I want you to imagine, everyone, as you're sitting there, your back is against the wall. Without thinking, you hear a bunch of people talking very loudly, and then all of a sudden, you hear your name being called out. You know that guy, Paul? Turn right now, right or left. Which ear would you put up to the door to listen more to what they're saying about you? And you might want to fill that in your little picture of that domino. And this is how this also works. Again, and I'm going to teach you an exercise to integrate both left and right ears. How many of you turned your right ear to listen to the wall? So just notice. And as you can see, that's connected to the logic brain. And here's how this plays out behaviorally. Those of you that had your right ear turned, how many of you can say that if somebody said something negative to you, about you, it could be years later, and for a nanosecond, when you see that person, you could almost hear that negative comment word for word for word. And then you go, well, that was a long time ago. Forget about it. Those of you that turned your left ear to listen are listening to the tone. the quality, the emotional content of that voice. And again, behaviorally, if you're left ear dominant and you hear somebody saying, Paul, 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 that doesn't sound too inviting to me, and I probably will not respond. So that's another way how our ear and our eyes and our brain dominance can work together. Next slide, please. So how many of you can say you're aware of not just external talk, but internal self-dialogue? We have one that says, yes, you can do it. No, you can't. This is okay. I've been doing this for a long time. No, you're not good enough. Self-talk can really have a negative effect on us, or it can have a positive effect. We want to build in, what do we say to bolster our self-confidence and internally say to ourselves, yes, I can do it. For myself, I would sometimes drift away, and I'd have to say to myself, stay focused. That was my internal self-talk. Stay focused. Don't drift off. Next slide, please. We're looking at auricular acupuncture. There's body acupuncture, and there's acupuncture in the ears. Now, as I have in my bio, I was a therapist for 10 years at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I was trained in ear acupuncture. But in this picture here, between the two ears, we have almost 300 acupuncture points. Okay? Next slide. This is a slide of 5 needling points for helping people come off their substances. It helps with the detoxification. So at KMH, on Mondays and Fridays, we would take time to put needles in our clients' ears. And then they would sit for 45 minutes with relaxing music. Now, what I'm going to have you do, everybody, is just sit where you are, turn your head in one direction, and notice your range of motion. Turn your head in the opposite direction, and notice your range of motion. How does that feel? So you're just using this as a pre-awareness exercise. Next slide, please. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is take your thumbs behind your ears, okay? Thumbs are behind your ears. Your fingers are in front of the ears. And I want you to gently take time to roll back your ears right down to your earlobes. Give it a tug down, forward, out to the side and back. Start again at the top of the ears, rolling backwards. And I want you to be thinking about all those acupuncture points that you're stimulating. When we're going down the outside of the ear, a lot of those points are for the spine. So one more time, everybody. Rolling back the ears. Give it a little tug on your earlobes, out to the side, forward and back. Now what I'd like you to do is put your fingers inside your ears and massage those points. You saw those key points I showed you with the NATA protocol. Very, very important. Doesn't take a long time. And let that go. If you're hearing any sounds, just notice that they sound a little clearer. You can hear maybe more overtones. Now what I'd like you to do is turn your head in one direction. Turn your head in the other direction. How many of you notice you have a tendency to actually feel a little bit more freedom, range of motion, turning your head in one direction or turning your head in the other direction? So if you're prone to having neck tension, this is an excellent one to do. Okay, next slide, please. So in your handouts, I've given you a number of different variations on what happens here. And a lot of us have our own unique styles, our wiring, our dominance pattern, okay? So you can read about that in your handouts, but I'd like to go on to the next slide. So this is a profile C. This is what I said at the beginning, just to recognize this. And you're just going to do click. So we got a left brain person. Next. There's the right brain. Next. There's your left eye dominance. There's your right eye. Next. You've got a right ear, but that connects to your left hemisphere, right? That crossover. Next. Next. Click. So we have our hands. Hands are tied into communication, directly crossing over to the left hemisphere. Next. Next. And our leg crosses over to our left hemisphere. So in the next slide, what we're looking at is this person's particular profile. What their challenge is they can move through stress. Remember how that right leg, that right foot is connected to the left hemisphere? The only sensory system that they're having difficulty with is their eye is left eye connected to the left hemisphere. So under stress, their visual acuity is challenged. Next slide. And we'll just go through this quickly. Okay, so next. So that's right brain, right eye. And next. So just looking at that picture, everybody, that individual has connection with their right brain because their dominant eye is left. They have access to communication with the left-handedness. They have access to movement with their left leg. The only sensory system that is not connected is that blue ear connected to the right hemisphere. They are going to have challenges with listening under stress because they won't have access to that wiring. Next slide, please. So again, you see the profile. So again, they're able to do a lot of these activities, except under stress, their auditory listening is compromised because their left ear or their dominant ear is on the right-hand side attached to the right hemisphere. Next slide. So there's a number of different resources I put here for you. A lot of this information that I've shown you comes from the dominance factor. It was written by a friend of mine, a neurophysiologist, Carla Hannaford, and there's, again, information on each of those 32 profiles. Okay, next slide. So we're doing arts in the brain. Next slide. So again, if we want to look at our brain as an operating platform, okay, we all have different wirings. How do we integrate better and better and better more of our wiring specific to ourselves? As I said earlier, every one of us has our own wiring, and we all use the whole brain as musicians. Next slide. Okay, so we want to really use a lot of these different techniques because, as you see, as we get that operating system going, our attentional skills support better learning, okay? So the more we do, the less we need because we're wiring the brain over and over again, these neural pathways. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's what we're doing, is really enhancing our learning and behavior, wiring our operating system. Next, please. Okay, so music develops not just parts, but the whole system. So when this brain of ours as musicians, we have attentional skills, perception, motor, our vestibular, our sense of balance. We can manage stress because as performers, we're dealing with it all the time. And we can also access our emotional cells and our cognitive. Next slide, please. So over here, it's interesting because you'll see harmony is on and rhythm is on the left side of the brain. Remember, right ear connected to the left hemisphere. The other side, we got a sense of intonation, processing, emotional self on the right hemisphere. So that's your left ear connecting. So musicians' brains differ. You can see the top in the orange, that's our motor cortex, our ability to play. In the bottom two pictures, those orange bottom dots are connected to our temporal lobe, our hearing senses, and short-term memory. Next, please. So again, music plays an important part for building brain mass. So when you see the yellow, that's great. But as musicians, all those red spots are enhanced functionality of the brain being musicians. Next slide. So non-performing art majors, okay, people that are not performing, this is their scans of their brain. And what I want you to pay attention to is this, not the orange, but the yellow. Next slide. These are performing majors. Do you see where all the yellow spots are enhanced? That is why we really build the brain as musicians with better wiring. So music training, auditorily, it processes, okay? We're always listening as we're playing. Next slide. I want you to see how, when we talk about neuroplasticity, the bottom pictures in the blue are musicians. So frequency recognition and loudness recognition. You see how many wiring components we have there as musicians versus the people at the top that are non-performers. Next slide. I wanted to show you this because this is like how we as musicians, all these pictures on the left versus on the right. Now, one of the things I want to share with you personally is after being a performer for a long time, I would have people come on up after a concert and say, Paul, that was incredible. Well, I was a lot younger then, and I would say, really? You didn't hear this mistake? You didn't hear that? Now, you've rehearsed the piece. What you're hearing is that much more acute compared to the people on the right. And what I eventually realized is they really enjoyed the concert, and they really didn't pick up some of the mistakes. They just enjoyed the overall performance. So eventually, when people would say to me, Paul, that was a fantastic concert, I just say, thank you. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And I did not critique their enjoyment and their listening. Next slide, please. So we're seeing music therapy. This is only after 5 days. Next slide. This is after 9 months. So we have music therapists now, and these are other areas. Okay, next. Okay, so now I want to take you through a couple techniques, everybody. So we're going to go quickly because our time is going quickly. Next slide. Next slide. So again, this is a scientific study. Dolphins are identical If you don't see a lot, if you see any differences, you're under a lot of stress. Next slide. So what do you say? 2 dolphins? Okay, next slide, everybody. We're doing meridian connection. All the meridians, when we do body acupuncture, start and stop at our hands and our feet. So what I'd like you to do is just extend your leg out in front, cross one ankle over the other, take your hands straight out in front, point your thumbs down, cross your wrists, bring your hands together and tuck them underneath and just rest them on your chest. Drop your shoulders. Breathe. And notice if you have a tendency to want to put the tongue on the roof of your mouth. It may already be there. If it's not, just put it there. That connects our central meridian up the front of the body, our governing up the spine. Just breathe. This is a wonderful exercise for calming emotions. I say we can have emotions without emotions having us. Cross your other leg over, everyone, please. And just wait for that nice in-breath or out-breath. For the sake of time, we're going to go into part 2, which is uncross your legs, uncross your arms. Bring your fingertips together very lightly. You can rest them on your lap. And just notice very lightly if you feel any pulsing in your fingertips. It's not necessary, but in traditional Chinese medicine, we do pick up the pulsing in our wrists. 3 superficial on the right and left, 3 deeper points, meridians on the left and the right. So just notice if you feel a pulsing. You can do this anywhere without anybody knowing what you're doing, and really center yourself. And this is a wonderful activity to integrate. Next slide. We're going to go really quickly. So this shows you brainwave states, but I want you to see alpha, which is 7 to 12 cycles per second. Theta is 4 to 7 cycles. Next slide. What you just did, the meridian connection, you see the red bar? That's your alpha state. The relaxation response was a phrase coined by a Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School, talking about the benefits of relaxation. He was an early pioneer. But what you just did with the meridian connection also raised the theta state, the yellow lines, 4 to 7 cycles. Okay, next. Next slide. There you go. 2 dolphins. Next slide. So sometimes you have a lot of inner dialogue. I talked about positive or negative self-talk. So with this one, next slide. Every thought you have lights up a particular neurocircuitry in the brain. Every thought, okay? And we can change some of this. Next slide. So what we want to do is take the brain activity from the back of our brain to the front part of our brain, because the back part is where we go into a reaction, our stress, fight, flight response, where the front part, frontal lobes, are for rational thought processing. Next, please. So we're going to hit some points in the skull. These are from Touch for Health Neurovascular. Next. They're just above your eyebrow. And what I'd like you all to do now is just place your fingertips just lightly on your forehead, just above your eyebrows. And just holding these points. If you like, you can close your eyes. And I'm going to time you for 1 minute starting now. Okay, everyone, that was 1 minute. Did it feel a little bit longer? This is an incredible technique that you can do for yourself anytime. It's great to take the time to fuse yourself as you're practicing, preparing for a performance. You could do this at intermission if you have something difficult coming up or challenging, just to calm your system down. And again, rewiring all those thoughts. Okay, next, please. If you want to go a little bit further, you can do this and then use your eye rotations. They're integral connections with the brain, and just do eye circles clockwise, counterclockwise. Anytime you feel any strain on the eyes, that's usually a stress hot spot. Hold it there, breathe until you feel the strain come off the eyes. Do a few more rotation, clockwise and anti-clockwise. In your handouts, you have a lot of explanation for this. Next, please. So again, taking last week's webinar with the 4 breathing exercises, with your knowledge of your brain wiring, left, right, both brain, ears, and eyes, you might want to think about how you use that in how you approach your practicing and how you approach performances. Next, please. So there you go. We have a ton of scientific research supporting the benefits of how music and the arts really build the brain. Next. So these are some of the research. I put all this information down in your handouts, but these are all the different benefits we get by music. Next. Thank you, everyone. End of webinar number 2. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for hanging in. I'm still working on the technology, but we'll get it down next week. I'm pretty sure of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for another great workshop, and we already look forward for next week's. Before we let you go and we end the broadcast, we did receive one quick question from one of our musicians. Her name is Katrina, and during one of the experiments, she noticed that she was going back and forth a lot, and she's wondering if it's possible for someone to not have one dominant side of the brain.
Well, it's really like, ideally, next week we're going to be looking at some more brain integration exercises. When I'm talking about the brain hemisphere, Katrina, it's more of when we're under stress, it's a survival response, fight or flight. We're not taking the time to integrate left and right at option A, B, C, or D. We're just doing everything we possibly can to get out of danger. We need to have, I put it this way, a general. We need one part of ourselves looking after the other parts. But as we use some of these integration exercises we did today and some more next week, you can wire it together. And what I love about these things is that the more you do, the less you need, because you have more and more neural connections for total brain integration. And ultimately, when we finish the fourth webinar, a lot of the people, performers I've trained, both musicians, singers, actors, athletes, can drop into that performance zone in 10 seconds. That's what I'm encouraging all of you to do, is keep using these activities. So as you develop your musical skills, you're also building your brain connective wiring. So yeah, if you find yourself going left or right, that's okay, Katrina. That is ultimately what we want to have. We want to have that working for us. We want to have that working for us. And then a crossover like this, integration working for us.
I hope this answers your question, Katrina. Thank you so much, Paul, and we'll see you back next Saturday at 2 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Marjorie, can we just stay online for a second?